So we're going to go ahead and get started. We know that R2M is a very, very truncated course around the Lean Launchpad methodology. But we did want to include two more key sort of informational pieces that we think are kind of critical to introduce at this point in time to keep teams moving forward. And that's a conversation around partnerships that I'm going to lead this afternoon, and then Tom's going to lead a conversation around forming team. Because at this stage, without partners and some attention to team, it's very, very likely that you're going to go back to your day job and lose momentum. So we wanted to make sure you had this content and a little bit of workshop under your belt to increase the probability of continued momentum going forward. So when we talk about partnerships, remember that business model canvas we introduced way back at the beginning. We haven't spent a lot of time with it because we've been focused mostly at that core center of value propositions and customer segments on the far right. Partnerships are all the way on the far left. And frankly, the basic question around partnerships is how do you leverage other people's resources? And how do they leverage yours? Because a partnership has to be two ways. If it's not two ways, it's probably not a partnership. So you'll want to think about naming it for what it is or working to change it so it actually is a better partnership. So, what defines a partnership? What are some of the things in your experience that defines a great partnership? Anybody?
Mutual benefit.
Mutual benefit, okay. You both have something to gain out of it and there's some alignment between those two. Perfect. Communications? Good.
Expectations.
Clear expectations. What else?
Trust.
Trust.
Maybe complementary.
Really? Complementary offerings. That's interesting. Partners don't go in with the same thing. They go in with different things that each other needs. Okay. Those are all great answers. We kind of put together a list. The idea of shared economics or mutual success or failure is the idea of mutual gains. The idea of co-development, so you have complementary capability or invention that you can do together. Because remember, ultimately, you're going to have to offer a solution. And if your technology isn't a complete solution, you likely need to partner with someone who can complement you. There's a couple of teams for whom partnerships early on are probably pretty likely. Jeannie, how do you get all the way through the FDA process on your own as a really tiny company, for example? Complementary capabilities or investments, Amy's point. The big common customers, Shine On. Is a distributor a partner or a customer for you? And answering that question is going to be pretty important to you. Distributor might be a pathway to the end users as customer. So common customers as an indicator of a potential partnership. Or a distributor might actually be your customer. So that's something you guys are still wrestling with, I think. Bottom line, for a great partnership to work, incentives have to line up. So there has to be something that they get out of it too, something that they specifically need you for in order to get it. So one of the tools we use for partnership assessment is this 2x2 matrix, where there's a give and a get for both me and the partner. And what I give is what the partner gets, and what the partner gives is what I get. Super simple, right? 2x2, give, get, me, partner, and we want the diagonals to work out for both of us. If that alignment works out, then that's the potential for a partnership. So very, very simple framework for assessing a potential partnership. If I can't figure out what the partner gets from me, chances are there's not a very effective partnership in the making there. And oftentimes for small, young companies, when they get into relationships with big, large companies who don't get enough, they end up the loser for it. But don't underestimate what you can bring to a big company. You can often de-risk things that they can't do on their own. You can accelerate things that they can't do nearly as quickly because of some of the issues of a big company's speed. So don't underestimate what you give to a larger partner. Okay, so it's really simple framework. But in order to fill this out, you need to understand what about partner value. When you think about a partnership, it's all about getting through a basic process of developing making, and then selling a product service offering. For many of you, you're pretty early in the development stage. But ultimately, you have to get through the develop, make, sell process, if you will. And a partner can bring certain things to get you through that stage faster and cheaper than you trying to do it all yourself. They can bring unique knowledge or expertise. They can speed up the time to market because of their unique knowledge, expertise, scale, maybe manufacturing partner, access to customer, maybe a distribution partner. They can even help you access new markets because they're already there, or because they want to be there and your capability allows them to go there. Tissue form allows certain kinds of clinics to go into a new and different standard of care and different scale of profitability. It may allow them differentiation or innovation. Tissue form's another one. Shine On might be one. Social context for PR firms. To what degree is your capability actually going to be a point of differentiation for certain leading PR firms? And can you position your offering in order to take them there? It may allow them or you to bring a broader and more complete offering. I'm trying to think of an example. SITSI. To what degree are some of the engagement practices an off-the-shelf product that you can bundle, or a partner that you need to find in order to do that more effectively than you guys figuring out how to do it on your own? So allowed you to provide that bundled offering without you going through the learning curve of inventing the complementary capability yourself. It may provide capital efficiency. What do I mean by capital efficiency? What do you think that means?
Minimum cost. Minimum overall cost.
So minimum overall cost, okay. Jeannie?
Like less capital equipment that they have to buy to do the service themselves.
Less capital equipment that they have to buy or you have to buy to do it yourself. Shine On, we've talked a lot about partnering with manufacturing, contract manufacturers. Capital efficiency is the name of the game there. I mean, imagine building new plants to make your lights. Not going to happen, probably, right? Some of the med device people, there might be a capital efficiency play there in terms of early partnerships. There might be a capital efficiency play for some folks that need FDA approval, where the capital is cash as opposed to physical assets. But the capital intensity of getting through the cash intensive process of getting through FDA approval as a newbie who's doing it for the first time is going to be very different than the capital intensity of somebody that basically specializes in taking product offerings at this stage and pushing them through that next stage of review and certification. It can also expand sources of revenue, customer segments that you may not be able to address on your own. And it may provide certain customer or supplier access. So there's a whole bunch of ways partners can help you get through that develop, make, sell cycle faster and more efficiently from an investment or capital intensity perspective than trying to do it all your own. When you're assessing partnerships, it's important to think about the rest of the business model canvas. Because even though key partnerships is that big giant block on the left, you really can't assess your key partners until you know what activities have to get done. FDA approval, manufacturing steps, changing the paradigm of certain industry stakeholders and players around metrics and certification for ecometrics. So if you don't understand the key activities that are necessary for you to get to market, you're unlikely to figure out who are your best partners to get there. You also need to think about the key resources. How many of them are yours and how many of them might be your partners? For certain kinds of resources, access to manufacturing plant, there's plenty of potential partners out there. So understanding the key activities, key resources is important. But the right side of the canvas also feeds the partnership conversation. Are there certain customer relationships that particular partner has that you could never build or couldn't build at the kind of capital efficiency that you'd need to build to be a growing company? Tissue Form's already found out about that with their two large players. Channels. Shine On has found out about that with the way product gets into bike shops. So understanding these basics are important to assessing potential partners. At the end of the day, you're going to be working to that partnership choice is going to affect both your cost structure and your revenue stream. So even though the key partners is on the far left of the business model canvas, your real partnership assessment involves almost the complete canvas. For the customer segment that you're looking to deliver a specific value to, who are the partners that are going to help you accomplish your key activities with the minimum amount of resources, or allow you to access the customers you desire because they have relationships or channels that they own and you can't afford to build. That was a big, long sentence that took that whole business model canvas into play. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about key partnerships. The thing about partnerships, though, is they're not about the business over all time. All we're asking you to think about is the key partnerships for you, sort of where you are now and where you need to get to as your next milestone, or maybe the milestone after that. Because figuring out partnerships over the whole life of a startup to growing company is, while it's a challenging thought exercise, is probably a little bit futile. But getting enough understanding of your key activities and the best way to get those accomplished with partners for the next set of milestones, if it's an SBIR application, if it's a grant, if it's a first customer program, if it's a prototype for minimum viable product, defining that milestone and then figuring out what are the partnership options that would help me meet that milestone at minimum cost in terms of time and capital is an important consideration at this point. The other thing about partners is when you get to expansion. That's another key point to consider who are appropriate partners. And partnerships through the form of acquisitions or joint ventures or co-investment are all options for expansions. And I threw this up there and I didn't even tell you what this is. Can anybody tell me what this curve is, basically? Yeah.
The adoption curve is crossing the chasm by that book. Basically, it says like the people who adopt a new technology solution just because it's exciting and new versus the general market would need, as you said, something more complete.
Yep. So it's basically the idea of time on the one scale and sort of revenue potential as the curve. So in the early stages, you may be able to go a bit on your own. First customer programs, minimum viable product, first prototype, first sale. You may be able to get there on your own. Even there, you might consider partnerships. But when you get to the point where you're getting into expansion and scale, past those early adopters, the partnership conversations may become even more important. There's a bunch of partnership considerations to think about. The first one is understand why the partner's there. While partnership is truly a relationship, it can't just be based on a personal relationship. My best friend and co-founder is going to be my best friend is going to be my partner to found this company because we were roommates in college. We've always gotten along well together. They're jazzed by my technology and really wants in. Not necessarily the best reason to pull them in as an early partner. Because at the end of the day, it has to be around a mutually beneficial relationship where incentives line up. And so some of those personal relationships, it's hard to probe what those incentives need to be. It might be hard to probe beyond the personal relationship what's in it for them and what's in it for you. Mentors in the room, do you have any partnership examples that talk about this issue of personal relationship versus mutually beneficial? Yeah.
I think even as a tool we've used, we have a questionnaire, and all the founders of the company will fill out the questionnaire separately and then come together and have a meeting to go over all their personal drivers, what their expectations out of the company are, and things like that. And it's not only useful in the beginning for going through exactly what you're saying, but then 2 years from then, when you're looking at selling the company, and somebody's like, we're only getting $5 million, that's not enough. And you can bring out what you've written 2 years ago and go back through what all the drivers were and try to help you have a consensus. That
is a great story, the idea of actually using tools to tease out what are those incentives or drivers. Because when you're in a small startup environment, and we're blending a little bit team and partnership conversation here, but you're looking to work with a small group of folks that really matter on moving things forward. Figuring out how to get to the bottom line of those incentives and drivers is important. So that's an interesting tool. If you have any questions on that, you'll share it, right?
Sure. And I mean, even on a contract standpoint.
Yep.
We do a contract where, first of all, you draw up a bullet point for each partner that's in the relationship and just do them out. Ignore all the legalese, ignore all the other stuff. Just do a 2-column bullet point of what everyone's getting out of the contract and start there.
So it sounds like they actually use that give-get framework as the input to their contracting mechanism, where before they turn it into legal, they line it out as the bullet points of what do we expect to get out of this and what do we expect to have to put into this as an early partnership contract. Yeah.
I think, Jean, you made a great point when you talked about not trying to map out partners for the entire life cycle. But underneath that, there's an issue I've lived repeatedly, which is partnerships are dating.
Yeah.
It's not marriage. You've also got to think about after breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And you go back to your BMS, and who actually owns the customer relationships when you break up? And all of a sudden, you start looking at what you thought were your customers, and you realize they weren't your customers. They were your partner's customers. And when that went away, your valuation, your growth curve, everything that goes with it may be going out the door. And frankly, that partner just was using you to fill a gap until they could develop the solution, the capability they needed. And they drew out all your intellectual property, well, maybe not all, as much as they could. Away with. But our biggest lessons came from who really owned the customer relationships. Time and again, at the end of the day, it's like a divorce. Friends choose who, and you end up losing ones that you, in many cases, thought were really your clients.
Yeah, really great points. Partnerships should be time limited, and you should understand at what point is the end point of the partnership and how does it dissolve, or what are your points along the way where either partner could in fact dissolve it. Yeah.
And one way of evaluating who owns the customers, are they in your database or not?
That's one way. It's not necessarily the legal contract way, though. Right. I mean, it is that question of who owns the customer, it has got lots of different answers to it. And when you're putting a partnership together that's around joint development, joint marketing, channel access, getting that stuff structured in a way that is clear. It's not just that I have them in my database. It's anybody who was a customer of theirs at the beginning of the relationship, it goes back to them at the end of the relationship. Holy crap, what do I get out of that, right? I mean, I put together JVs. I'm a former McKinsey person. Hasn't all of us done that? And figuring out how to unwind the joint venture, figuring out how to unwind the joint venture is an important consideration going in. And is it a prenup? If you're talking about dating and marriage, I mean, it's kind of that equivalent. And it's not always fun, especially if it's around a personal relationship, because it feels a little stickly to say, wait a second here, when we break up, who gets what? So having the adult courage to have those conversations, that it's not personal, but we do need to get these things spelled out as much as we can in advance, because there will be things that you don't know how to structure in advance.
Well, to that point, what he made, the best partnerships are the ones you don't do. I mean, candidly, I've been down the road on a number where, because we forced the sort of conversation he was talking about, or you were talking about, you had the oh shit moment. That if you headed off, you avoid spending 3 years and losing everything that you thought you were getting into it, or realized what they were really wanting out of it that you didn't foresee.
Which kind of brings us right to the last point of a partnership consideration. Don't do business with jerks. Life is too short to get trapped into a situation that's not going to help you with where you need to go next. So, and what's tricky in this is to not get caught up in the, I got to get this deal done. That give then get piece, I got to get this. They're the only ones who can give it to me. And then the terms around getting it are so onerous or so one-sided that there's not enough get left for you at the end of the partnership. You got to walk away. And that's a tough one to get your head around. So that brings us to our very last one. Have a backup plan. Never, what?
He's got a question.
Oh, Jeannie.
It's fine. I was just curious on the point that you just said about no jerks, life is too short, and also some of the comments. I guess, what are the best objective questions to ask to do due diligence, essentially, ourselves on someone who could be a potential partner? Because I've found in the business world, people are very good at talking and seeming like they're not a jerk. And so how do you, like, make sure you're digging into that, and like what type of questions do you want to make sure you know?
Mentors, do you have any examples? Yeah.
Some of it is find out who they've worked with before,
Yep.
who they've broken up with before, the bad breaker-uppers of the world. Or, I mean, that's where the jerkiness comes out.
Right, little reference checks.
Doing it on your own is scary, because, I mean, your point, you get to this, I've got to get the deal done. I've been in enough of those where we really needed it. We backed ourselves into a corner, and we needed it. It was like last call at the bar on Friday night. You got to go home with somebody, and we're going to make it happen. These are things we've been through in life at one point, but once the momentum gets going, it gets really tough. And when you've got relationships your CEO doesn't want to hear, this person has shafted every other company
Right.
they've done it with before. So ask around.
Ask around, absolutely.
And one other thing that goes along with that too, sometimes deals don't happen, sometimes bad things happen, even though local partners were committed. When you ask about someone, people with high integrity, people will still speak highly of them even though it might not have been the best outcome. So when you see people speaking of someone highly, even though they didn't benefit as much as they thought, or maybe even not at all, that's a sign that at least they didn't feel cheated or screwed over or what have you. Because, if you continually treat people poorly or unethically or what have you, that pattern continues to come out, and the opposite as well. You don't have to be perfect. We've all had deals that didn't work out the way we wanted.
So the idea of, I call it reference checks, but it's not really reference checks, checking the reputation, asking them for other similar deals that they've done before, and actually sharing, they'll have to redact it, but sharing the contract forms and how things ended up. Talking through what happens if the people change. You made the deal with John Smith, the CFO, and Mary Jones, the chief marketing officer, and both Mary and John went on to other companies before the deal was over. How do you know that the deal persists as originally intended? And it's a tricky thing to get at because the various partnership agreements should be written down, hopefully in the form of a contract of some form, or a letter of agreement, or some kind of a partnership agreement. And that's company to company. But there's a little bit of the how is it understood person to person. That is one of the risks if the people move on, or a situation changes where the urgency with which that person has to perform changes. When you entered the partnership, they were at the top of the market and they had an FDA problem, so they ended up with a huge recall and billions of dollars of market cap went away. What resource are they going to put into marketing for you while they're dealing with this disaster on the other side of the business? So understanding some of those contingencies and what your recourses are if people change or business situation changes is an important part of managing partner risk. Which brings me to the next piece, some of the partnership risk. One of the issues is pacing. What do they need to get done by when? Large companies seem like they have lots of resources to bring to the party, so they should be able to get things done faster because they can put lots of money into it. But if it takes 4.5 months to get a decision to spend those millions, the millions don't bring you any progress in the 4.5 months you're working through their decision making. So just recognize that the pace mismatch may matter to you. You may have more urgency than your partner does. So understanding if that's true and what you can do about it. And setting expectations about it. Competence mismatch. They're not as good as you thought they were. You're not as good as you thought you were. You end up having to invest in a whole bunch of capability building to meet the terms of your partnership, which actually is a little bit of a side trip from where you really want to go with your company. So recognizing that may be a risk. Poorly defined roles. You aren't specific enough around who's going to do what and who's going to end up with what. We've already talked about that. Lack of product vision. They don't see it the same way you do. They don't see where this can go. To them, it's just another thing for their product line. For you, it's a change the industry kind of potential. They don't see the follow-on products, the ongoing development to support it, the product releases that need to come in year 2 and year 5 and year 7. Completely different objectives. And that goes back to the first one, the incentives and alignment in the very beginning. That issue around change in either business position or personnel. And then things like IP issues. Who owns what? At the outset, at the end. We're going to take this development from where it is, ecometrics. We've got a really sophisticated modeling platform, and we're going to co-invest with a major corporate partner to build it into a web-based interface that companies all over the planet can use. Who's going to end up with the IP over it? And then how are we going to get out of this thing? Even when it's successful, it should still end up with a completion in some sense of how we end up unwind and who ends up with what. It's even more important if it isn't successful. So, talk briefly about different kinds of partnerships types. There's strategic partnerships, joint ventures, supplier relationships, joint business development agreements, and something that's starting to be called co-opetition, which is a little bit vague, but could be any and all of the above. And these are less about legal form and more about intent, because each of these different kinds of partnerships can be structured using similar legal tools, if you will. Strategic partners or joint ventures tend to be constructed through contracts with term limits, if you will, review and unwind dates, if you will, or milestone-driven reviews and unwind provisions. The rationale for doing a joint venture is to reduce the list of things that you need to do in order to provide a competitive product or service offering. The reason why the partner usually does a joint venture is it accelerates something that they want to get to market too. You've got something half done that would take more money, more time for them to catch up. So you're going to end up using the partners to build the whole product and use a customer potentially, or you could end up using a customer as a partner to develop the product. Okay? Supplier partnerships, there's kind of two flavors. And the first is sort of outsourcing agreements. I'm not sure I would always call those partnerships, but they are something to think about. And it's basically the idea of outsourcing some of those things that may not be core to your business, but you definitely need to start and address the early stages of business formation and growth. So some of the back office work, some of supply chain work, some of the manufacturing work could be the supply partnerships. Definitely some of the admin, attorneys, accounting, those and HR could be outsourced partnerships. And that's frequently a good idea to do these. Things that are almost commodity-based. They're not necessarily core to your business, but they are necessary for you to have access to and get done. And typically, yeah.
I was just curious, how would you define what like attorneys would get from like apart from your business? Well, like how's that a partnership, I guess?
It's to me the supplier partnerships are really more supplier purchase agreements, if you will. You're basically buying services.
It's the most kind of superficial.
It's the most superficial. And some folks wouldn't necessarily call this a partnership. We've thrown it in here because it's important consideration. I mean, basically for partnering, the main question you're asking is, am I going to make it or buy it? If I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it myself, or am I going to partner with somebody to make it?
Okay.
Many of these on the outsourced suppliers are really more buys. So they're a little lower risk, a little easier to structure. Typically for attorneys and CPAs, you just pay fees. You don't trade equity. You don't do joint customer agreements or anything like that. Okay. For supply chain and manufacturing, you may do some joint development work. You may do some revenue flow versus pure fee-for-service type arrangements.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay? And then you might actually get into partnerships with some of your direct suppliers. They've got a key component or raw material that you absolutely critically need for your product to make it into the market. There, the risks are huge, so making sure the incentives align are really, really critical. TSM microwave, how do you really work with the system integrators, right? So that you end up with something out of the partnerships. It's a tricky one because most of the elements of the installed system are going to come from them. So making sure that you have some leverage to gain in the partnership is going to be important. The next kind of partnership that we talk about is something we call joint business development, which is the idea of developing, either promoting complementary products. So you're going to share advertising, marketing, sales programs, and you're going to market together. You know, perfect example, Intel Inside with Dell, right? Intel was doing the branded microchip. Dell was selling the computers, joint marketing agreement, where Intel paid Dell a ton to put Intel Inside on their Dell computers. Really old agreement, but a perfect, you know, business school case example. The challenge with joint business development is typically one is a dominant player. So making sure that you've got something that the dominant player really, really wants. So, you know, I already talked about the Intel offering the advertising to PC. Ford Motor sponsored a bunch of technology development competitions where the winning startup actually had the opportunity to work with Ford Motor's supply chain partner on developing it into a product. Great joint business development, because that tiny little startup would never have had access to Ford Motor's product development pipeline. Certainly wouldn't have had access to the product development at that tier 1 supplier. And so, you know, that is a really interesting joint development. The tricky part for the startup is, did they, you know, where did they want to end up out of it? In that situation, the startup's typically expected to be acquired. So if that's where you're headed with your joint development agreement, think that through and structure it so that when you do get acquired, it's at a decent valuation. Because at the end of the day, the tier 1 supplier and Ford Motor are going to be calling the shots as to what the product, when the product gets into the car. Okay? The last one I'll talk about is co-opetition, which is a made-up word. It's the idea of competitors who cooperate, or competitive products that are jointly promoted. And that's a tricky one, but it's not unusual. And it's situations where industries are working together to grow a whole new industry. So ecometrics may end up in a co-opetition mode, where there's several approaches to creating global standards around supply chain certifications. And and that you all benefit from having that become the expectation, is that pretty much any global supply chain has a body who is overseeing its sustainability. Now, does ecometrics have to do it all, or is ecometrics part of a consortium of folks that take that forward? That would be a co-opetition model, for example. Typically, industry associations, trade shows, lobbying efforts, standards efforts, those kinds of things are often co-opetition type settings. Okay? Deadly silent after our lunchtime. A whole bunch of stuff coming at you all at once when you're still kind of wondering, do I have a value prop yet? But in order to bring it down to reality, we're going to do a little workshopping. We'll just leave you at your place because we don't really have room for flip charts and all that stuff. But work with your teams and lay out what key partners do you think you need to achieve your next what?
We're not doing a workshop. We're moving into the coffee talk right after this.
I thought we had until 1:45. Isn't that what the agenda says?
1:15.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, for homework, the best way to think about, so you were right, there is no workshop. The best way to think about partnerships is actually go back to the milestone. What is the next milestone or milestones that you need to do? And then who do you think you need to engage in order to be more successful with that milestone? And then do it in the context of the give-get, so that you're confident you're bringing something to that party and that you can structure it in a way where you end up with the outcome that you desire. Yes?
Just one question about, so you said that partnerships basically always have to be time limited and you need to plan for them to unwind at some point in the future. And then, so what about Dell and Intel? Have they decided that they're going to split at some point? Or why would they necessarily have to split if they're not being successful in a partnership?
The marketing arrangement where Intel paid Dell to put those stickers on their computers ended years ago.
Right, but there's still...
But there's still a supplier relationship between Dell and Intel.
Okay.
But the actual agreement was time limited. For this many years and this much money, here's what Dell's going to do in terms of branding, and here's the money that Intel's going to put into that effort to promote Intel Inside for Dell.
Okay, no, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that you have no relationship after your partnership. You may morph into another stage, right? So that's something to think about too. Yeah.
Just changing terms, is saying it's going to end, it's renewable.
Right.
So in 2 years, we will take another look at it and see if we want to do another 2 years.
Yep. Review points are really, really critical, and they can either be date or a milestone or breach, condition of where a partner is not fulfilling their obligation. And so thinking through all three of those. And then being willing to do what it takes to actually act according to those. All right, we will move on to our next discussion.